You don't need to fit in. The shocking truth about belonging. Have you ever felt like you don't belong? Like no matter how hard you try to mold yourself into the expectations of others, something inside you remains disconnected. It's one of the most painful human experiences to stand in a crowded room, surrounded by people, yet feel completely alone. But here's the shocking truth. This feeling isn't a problem to be fixed. It's a clue, a message from the deepest part of yourself, whispering that maybe, just maybe, you weren't meant to fit in. Maybe you were meant to stand out. Society drills the idea of belonging into us from birth. We're taught that to be accepted is to be safe, and to be safe is to be happy. From childhood, we learn to seek approval, whether it's from parents, teachers, friends, or even strangers on the internet. We internalize the belief that our worth is measured by how well we align with the group. The problem? The group changes. The rules shift. The expectations evolve. And you're left chasing an ever-moving target, molding yourself into shapes that were never meant to contain you. Think about it. When was the last time you made a decision purely because it was what you wanted, without considering how it would look to others? When was the last time you spoke your mind without filtering it through the invisible fear of rejection? We live in a world where standing out feels dangerous. And in some ways it is. To stand out is to risk judgment. It's to invite criticism. It's to step into the unknown, where there are no guarantees of acceptance. But here's the paradox. The people we admire most, the ones who leave a lasting impact on the world, are almost always the ones who refuse to conform. Look at history. The greatest thinkers, artists, and revolutionaries were those who embraced their differences rather than suppressing them. Einstein didn't fit in. Neither did Van Gogh. Neither did Martin Luther King Jr. or Socrates or any other figure who reshaped the course of human thought. What if they had spent their lives trying to be normal? What if they had silenced their own voices in favor of blending in? The world would be a much duller place. And yet, so many of us do exactly that. But we trade authenticity for approval. We shrink ourselves to avoid discomfort. We become ghosts in our own lives, haunted by the versions of ourselves we were too afraid to be.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
But what exactly is belonging? Is it merely the absence of rejection? Or is it something deeper? We often confuse fitting in with belonging, but they are not the same. Fitting in is a performance. It's learning the rules of a particular group and adhering to them, even if they contradict who you are. Belonging, real belonging, is the opposite. It's being accepted not despite your differences, but because of them. And here's the hard truth. If you have to change yourself to fit in, you don't actually belong. You are merely tolerated. So ask yourself, is the version of you that people accept actually you? Or is it a carefully constructed illusion? How much of your personality, your dreams, your opinions have been shaped by the fear of exclusion? If no one were watching, if judgment didn't exist, who would you be? Here's the twist. The fear of standing out isn't entirely irrational. Humans are wired for social connection. In ancient times, being cast out from the tribe often meant death. That primal fear still lingers within us, whispering that to be different is to be in danger. But we are not in the Stone Age anymore. The greatest threat to our well-being is not exile, it's living a life that isn't truly ours. Imagine waking up one day and realizing you've spent years, maybe decades, living according to someone else's script. Imagine realizing that the approval you worked so hard for never actually made you happy. This happens more often than you think. People follow the right paths, say the right things, and then reach a point where they feel empty, lost, wondering why they still don't feel like they belong. The truth: they never belonged to those spaces in the first place. They were just visitors, passing through a life that wasn't theirs. So what's the solution? If we abandon the need to fit in, do we risk becoming completely isolated? Not at all. In fact, the opposite happens. When you stop trying to be what you think others want, something incredible occurs. You attract the people who genuinely resonate with you. Not the polished, performative version, but the real, unfiltered you. You no longer have to chase approval because the connections that form are based on authenticity, not illusion. And here's a question that might change everything. What if the very thing that makes you feel like an outsider is actually your greatest strength? What if the qualities that make you different are not flaws, but gifts? What if the world doesn't need another person who blends in, but someone who dares to bring something entirely new? We spend so much time trying to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold us. But maybe, just maybe, the goal was never to squeeze into the mold. Maybe the goal was to break it. The paradox of acceptance, why true belonging comes from letting go there, is a strange paradox at the heart of human existence. The more you chase acceptance, the less of it you truly feel. The more you try to mold yourself into the expectations of others, the more invisible you become, not to them, but to yourself. And yet, we are taught from an early age that belonging is something we must earn. We learn to trade pieces of ourselves for approval, to suppress discomfort for the sake of harmony, to become what is expected rather than what is real. But here's the shocking truth: real belonging is not something you achieve by changing who you are. It is something that happens naturally when you stop trying to be anything other than yourself. But letting go of the need to fit in is terrifying. It feels like stepping off a ledge into the unknown with no safety net beneath you. Because if you stop pretending, if you stop performing, what if no one stays? What if the people you love, the ones who have always known the version of you that played by the rules, decide they don't want the real thing? This fear is what keeps so many people trapped in lives that feel too small. They fear that choosing themselves means losing everything. But here's the question no one asks: if being yourself drives people away, were they ever truly with you to begin with? Or were they only with the mask you wore? We have been conditioned to believe that loneliness is the absence of people. But the deepest loneliness is not being physically alone, it is being surrounded by people and still feeling unseen. It is playing a role so well that no one questions it, yet knowing, deep inside, that the person they love isn't really you. The irony is that in our desperate attempt to secure belonging, we often build a prison for ourselves. We become so afraid of rejection that we reject ourselves first, so that others don't have the chance. We silence our real thoughts, adjust our real dreams, dim our real light, hoping that in exchange we will be granted the security of acceptance. But is it truly security if it comes at the cost of your identity? There is another way. A harder way, yes, but a path that leads to a kind of belonging that is real, unshakable, and deeply fulfilling. It starts with a radical shift in perspective. Belonging is not something others give you. It is something you create within yourself. But you do not need external validation to confirm your worth. You do not need approval to justify your existence. You belong not because others say you do, but because you are here fully, completely, and unapologetically. But how do you embrace this truth when everything in the world seems to push against it? When the pressure to conform is overwhelming, when the fear of standing out is ingrained so deeply that it feels like survival? The answer lies in understanding one simple fact: you are not meant to be for everyone. And that is a good thing. Think of the people you admire most, not the ones who are universally liked, but the ones who inspire something deep within you. The ones whose presence, ideas, or creations have changed the way you see the world. Were they liked by everyone? No. In fact, many of them were misunderstood, criticized, even rejected by the majority. But did that stop them from becoming who they were meant to be? Absolutely not. The people who make the biggest impact are often the ones who refuse to dilute themselves to fit into spaces that were never meant for them. So here's a question that could change everything. What if the fear of rejection is actually a sign that you are on the right path? What if being misunderstood is not a failure, but proof that you are stepping into your true self? What if the discomfort of not fitting in is not a problem, but a necessary step toward finding the people and places where you actually belong? Because here's the truth no one tells you: belonging isn't about being accepted by everyone. It's about finding the few who see you as you are and say, yes, that's exactly who we've been looking for. It's about realizing that the spaces where you've struggled to fit in were never the right spaces for you in the first place. It's about understanding that your uniqueness is not a burden, but a beacon, a signal that will eventually draw the right people into your life. But before you can find those people, before you can truly belong anywhere, you must first belong to yourself. You must learn to be comfortable in your own presence, to trust your own thoughts, to value your own voice even when no one else does. You must be willing to walk alone, not as a punishment, but as a declaration that your worth is not contingent on external approval. And here's the paradox: the moment you stop needing to fit in, the moment you release the desperation for belonging, is the moment you actually start to find it. Because when you are no longer bending yourself into unnatural shapes to be accepted, you allow the right people to see you clearly. And when they see the real you, the connection is deeper, more meaningful, more unbreakable than anything built on pretense. So ask yourself, if you stop trying to fit in, if you let go of the fear of rejection, if you embraced who you truly are without apology, what would change? Who would you become? And most importantly, would you finally, for the first time in your life, feel like you truly belong? The illusion of acceptance, why you'll never be truly loved until you show who you really are. There is an unspoken truth that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. But the version of you that is widely accepted is often not the real you. It is the edited, polished, socially acceptable version, the one that knows what to say, how to behave, how to navigate the expectations of others. And while this version may be liked, may be admired, may even be celebrated, it is not truly loved. Because love, real love, cannot exist where there is no truth. You can only be loved to the extent that you are known. And how can anyone truly know you if you have spent your whole life hiding? But hiding is easy, it feels safe. It gives you the illusion of control. As long as you are playing a role, you can manage people's perceptions of you. You can avoid conflict, dodge rejection, maintain the fragile sense of belonging that comes from being what others expect. But deep down, you know the cost. You feel it in the moments of quiet, when there is no one to perform for, when you are left alone with the truth of who you are. That is when the loneliness creeps in, not because you are physically alone, but because the connections you have built are not rooted in authenticity. They are built on a version of you that does not fully exist. So here is the terrifying but liberating truth. If you want to be truly loved, you must be willing to be truly seen. And that means risking everything. It means risking disapproval, disappointment, misunderstanding. It means accepting that some people will walk away when they realize they were only ever in love with the mask. It means understanding that the more real you become, the fewer people will be able to stay. But it also means that those who do stay, those who choose you, not despite your truth, but because of it, will love you in a way that is deeper, more honest, and more fulfilling than anything you have ever known. But this is where most people hesitate, because the idea of losing approval is terrifying. We crave validation, sometimes so desperately that we are willing to trade pieces of ourselves for it. We tell ourselves that it is enough to be liked, even if we are not fully understood. But is it? Is it really enough to go through life never being completely seen? To spend your years surrounded by people who only know fragments of you, who only love the curated version, who would not recognize the real thing if you finally had the courage to show it. And here is the most painful realization of all: the love you seek, the deep, unwavering, unconditional connection you crave, will never come if you are unwilling to be vulnerable. Because love, in its purest form, demands truth. It requires you to stand in the open, without armor, without disguise, and say, "This is me, all of me." And then, and only then, can you see who is truly meant to stand beside you. But this is not just about relationships, but it is about how you show up in every aspect of your life. It is about the way you speak, the way you dream, the way you live. It is about whether you are willing to embrace your own uniqueness, even when it makes others uncomfortable. Because the world does not need another person who fits in. It needs people who are brave enough to stand out. It needs people who are willing to be fully, unapologetically themselves, because that is the only way anything truly meaningful is ever created. So ask yourself, if you stripped away the masks, if you stopped performing, if you allowed yourself to be exactly who you are, who would still be there? And more importantly, would you finally, for the first time, feel what it means to be truly loved? The freedom of not belonging, why letting go is the beginning of everything. What if everything you thought about belonging was wrong? What if the feeling of not fitting in, the very thing you've spent your whole life trying to fix, was never meant to be fixed? What if it was a sign not of failure, but of freedom? The truth is, the search for belonging often traps us in invisible cages. We chase approval. We mold ourselves into shapes that others will accept. We silence parts of ourselves to avoid rejection. But what if the very act of trying to belong is what keeps us from truly living? There is a moment that comes when you finally let go. A moment when you stop asking for permission to exist as you are. When you stop explaining yourself, stop justifying your differences, stop bending just to fit into places that were never meant for you. At first, it feels like loss. It feels like stepping into an empty space where all the old comforts of validation and approval used to be. But then something incredible happens. The emptiness is replaced with something else, something real, but a sense of self that is no longer dependent on external acceptance. A kind of peace that comes from no longer chasing a moving target. A deep, unshakable freedom. Because here's the truth, not everyone is supposed to understand you. Not everyone is meant to walk your path. and that's okay. The people who leave, the ones who drift away when you stop performing, are simply making space for the ones who are truly meant to be in your life. The ones who see you. The ones who don't need you to shrink or soften or mold yourself into something easier to digest. The ones who recognize your uniqueness not as something to be fixed, but as something to be celebrated. But before those people can find you, you must first find yourself. You must be willing to walk alone, not as punishment, but as proof that your worth is not tied to the acceptance of others. You must embrace solitude, not as loneliness, but as a declaration that you would rather stand in truth than sit in comfortable illusion. You must understand that your value does not decrease just because some people fail to see it. And here's the paradox. The moment you stop needing to belong is the moment you start to. Not in the way you once imagined, not by blending in, not by being universally accepted, but by finding the rare, beautiful connections that only come when you are fully yourself. The kind of belonging that is not forced, not earned, but natural. The kind that does not require you to change, but simply to be. So what happens now? Now that you know you don't need to fit in, now that you see the illusion of belonging for what it is, what do? You live fully, unapologetically. You stop waiting for approval and start creating a life that feels like home. You stop chasing acceptance and start standing firmly in who you are. But you let go of the need to be understood by everyone, and in doing so, you finally make room for the people who were meant to understand you all along. And maybe, just maybe, you'll look back one day and realize that not fitting in was never a curse. It was a gift. The first step toward a kind of belonging that is deeper, rarer, and more real than anything you ever could have found by trying to be like everyone else. Because in the end, the goal was never to fit in. The goal was to be free.